Hello, everyone, and welcome to Book Passage's Conversations with Authors event, or in today's case, Conversations with Poets, which makes it so special. I love it. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. Just a reminder that we will be taking questions and comments. So do put your questions and comments in the chat box there, and I promise we will get to it before everything is said and done. We love for you to actually engage with our authors and with their works by telling us what's on your mind. So definitely feel free to do that. For those of you who are regular viewers or attendees to our live events in the store, you know we pride ourselves at Book Passage on curating the most interesting and engaging talks featuring the best of writers from all genres. Today is no exception, with a focus on poetry and poets. And one of the books featured is Risk. Award-winning poet in it, award-winning poet Rusty Morrison experiments with traditional structure and form using a constraining form of 7-syllable segments with breaks between to explore questions of limitations. In these poems, she's not just writing about constraints, but living inside and seeing how to manage them. It's fascinating. Rusty Morrison was the co-founder and has been the co-publisher of Omnidawn since 2001. Her other books include After Urgency and the award-winning The True Keeps Calm Biting Its Story. She has taught in MFA programs, been visiting poet at colleges, and teaches workshops through Omnidawn and elsewhere. So I could have gone on and on with that bio, but we had to cut it off somewhere, Rusty. In conversation with Rusty is poet extraordinaire Maw Shein Win. Her full-length poetry collection, Percussing the Thinking Jar, will be released this fall. We're really looking forward to it. We will have that at Book Passage.
From
Her
Omnidawn.
Yes. Her poetry collection storage unit for the Spirit House was nominated for the Northern California Book Award in Poetry. So please welcome these two very talented, award-winning authors, writers, poets to the Book Passage virtual stage. Thank you both for doing this.
Thank you so much, Paula. So I guess I start. So I'll begin by thanking everyone at Book Passage, Paula Farmer, Zach, and dear Ma for being a wonderful part of my collaborator in this work and dear friend. And I want to thank everyone who's taking their time to watch this either live now or in the future at the Book Passage link. I'll begin by saying just a little bit about syllable counting, which Paula said something about. You can't hear the syllabics as I read because that would interfere with your listening. But the point of them is not how they impact you, but how they impact me. Their intention for me is to free me from the ways I tend to put language down on a page, because the constraint, the 7-syllable segments, followed by a caesura, there isn't necessarily room in those 7 syllables to say what my ego wants to say. And I don't break any words in half at their syllabic break. So I'm constantly having to revise, which causes me to reimagine what I intend to say. And then some of the poems in Risk are called Narrow Negotiations. They have a 7-syllable line with 14 couplets. So I'll start with a Narrow Negotiations. It seems a risk to recall that you dreamt of a drumbeat in a fresh burial ground, a rhythm. The rhythm was a kind of receptor. But what is it you want to receive? Birds are receptive to holes in the sky so as to vanish from the present to the past and find a safer way home. Gnats spin holes in the air and slip through to where they just were. How much better if you could live each instant as if it were already behind you. Look to your right. Look to your right as you drive the freeway this morning. Roll down all your windows. The wind isn't sentient. Still, the wind does feel alive to you. Awake to its release of air. From it comes a release of your own, pent-up tics, frayed nerves. How many hours or days have you been holding your breath, avoiding breathing? Hasn't it been a defiance of living that you've not let yourself see harms you, only you? Even if it somehow seems to become a mastery for you, a skill. Here now, driving to work, parking the car, breathe out the child who you no longer need to be, that child you were so frightened, alone. Your mother used to make you come with her in the car. She was always driving the highways, but not heading anywhere. You in the passenger seat, eyes turned away from her as much as she'd allow that freedom to an elsewhere that adulthood would someday offer you. How sure you were then that if you were behind the wheel, you'd know exactly where to go. All the places you thought a road could take you. Narrow negotiations. The first bite of an apple slice makes its savor sing. The future is warbling as you chew, a clairvoyance. But the next bite is only a memory of that savor, a silent preservation, a stuffed songbird. The third bite will taste of the taxidermist's pride in skillful resemblances. How surprisingly sour is what's left. It makes you believe that you must dull sensation. An ornate cage is what you build for what remains as you rationalize why your ardencies have gone fugitive. No wild poppies. No wild poppies growing in your backyard's weeds. Exhaust yourself waiting and watching. A kind of watching that's like lying down in what should be a margin between you and death. You believe death is a long way on the far side of growing things, but you need to watch soil, how volunteer seedlings of foxgloves only grow where other plants have died. Every plant needs death to eat, or it will starve. Starving is the only option that some of us think we have. Try the latest hair gel in order to stiffen up against damage, but stiff hair will seed in itself harm that advertisements won't admit. How easily brittleness will break you if you let it. You spend every spare hour watching from your window, but not letting yourself know what you're waiting for. Then you glimpse an orange color, one wild poppy. Then you see more. They hold the echo of sunrise, chiming a pale luminescence, even hours into afternoon's heat. A mind can wait for decades for color when it isn't letting itself recognize how color is actually already blooming within it. You watched as your friend lived wildly, freely in the weeks before her death, in ways she'd never lived in her lifetime before. Will you let yourself wait that long? Narrow negotiation. Chaff of the pain in today's news, but you'd meant to write chafe, not chaff. Still now you walk into this sudden field of chopped hay. You have work to do. Winnow away the thick husk of your expected direction. Find what can be a surprise right in front of you. A woman who sits down in the BART seat across from you. Her bloodshot eyes are chaos. Your chaos is bloodshot too. Memory is a fertile field for your archived emergencies. Watch her, watch no one, the no one who is you. Deep fog on the street. Deep fog on the street coming visible under street lights. If you walk out the door, will you be lost? A sense of being the lost thing grows dimensions that are more evocative the longer you allow, opening you to other sensations that your body's cells emit. A condensation of emotions suffuses your senses and actually inspires your hand to risk reaching to find the doorknob is in your grip. For your legs to bring you across, consider the word threshold and imagine yourself working in a field, early dawn, a century ago. You have strong arms for threshing wheat. Walk out the door into the skill that is a field worker's. Outside are droplets of rain moving in unison, which you feel more than see. Some forms of attention won't come from what's before you, won't come from memory that you actually lived. You needn't have words for what arrives from all the selves and more than the selves that you are. Clouds break open so very far above that it is part intuition to see how rain is just now beginning. Say you in this life. She'll be anyone. Look inside what you might mean by a moment. That is this moment, and see it is no elsewhere but this, and this, and this. As the changing shape you can enter at any place you stand. Here's a shape that opens into the cycle of harvests that is every alternative artist you are. Narrow negotiations. Pine needles dead on the limb blur as wind shivers them loose from their outlines for a split second. Then they snap back. Wind is a workshop of freedoms that only intuition turned kaleidoscopic can perceive. What is it you've been dead to that's within yourself? Your outline is breathing. Look, see a world of new lives form the death in you fertilized to let each instant you live riot with new frequencies. A caterpillar. Here's a caterpillar pillar on this beach where you walk a long way from shrubs. How did it crawl so far? You carry it back from the waves and gently pitch it toward wild grass. Haven't you been waiting for a hand to pick you up, toss you into a future that would be soft, welcoming? Last night's storm tossed a bare branch onto your porch. Its three limbs were all pointing together toward nothing, but you wanted to ask it how to go there. You listened deep in the hollow at the core of the branch's quiet for an answer. How far down will it let you travel before it is too narrow? Some silence stays wide. You watched for a long time after your mother's silent mouth fell open at death. It called to you with its quiet, but you wouldn't answer. Now, you carry that refusal in everything you don't say to anyone or to yourself. Narrow negotiation. You lie under the covers, the window wide, for any breeze, better than sleep to be deep in night's tall grass. Silence isn't ruined, but advanced by frog's guttural echo of your forgotten desire to be an animal made permeable by the sounds outside of what ears can apprehend. The noise when sentience rips through night's starless cover that shifts what day it will be. Frog hears and comes investigating. You rub. You rub the just-picked poppy petal between thumb and first finger until orange is your prisoner. Just like squeezing yourself between one political act and the next, leaving just trace color. Hard even to recognize as an adaptation that you once thought would breed safety. But a compressed petal isn't pretty. Is pressure really your ally? Does exerting force put you in charge? You have sex under tight sheets just to feel how skin is such a thin containment for what's dispossessed inside you as the sheets too easily give way. Orphaned in air, sometimes you close your eyes, spit over the side of the world, any world. Open them and you see that there's dampness on your lover's face, residue of hot tears he won't wipe away. Air thick with steam. It's a mirror of what bodies are. Just heat and surrender. You are excess, but you don't know it. Will you feel when you turn into pure static, sweetly pungent as heated tar?
Thank you for that beautiful, powerful reading, Rusty. Thank you. So I have a few questions for you.
You do? Okay.
So in your introduction, you offer, the point of it was to alter, to free me from the ways I tend to put language down on the page. The constraint is this: 7 syllables in a segment, then a break, a pause. If a word I wanted to write had more syllables at the break, then I had to revise what I'd written to make the segment fit. This caused me to reimagine what I was saying. So, Rusty, I appreciate your thoughts about how your syllable counting constraint frees you from previous ways you've written.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know a little bit more about how you came up with this constraint.
Mm-hmm.
And, wondering if the number 7 has a special significance.
Okay. Okay. So,
and just if you could please elaborate on your process of this reimagining.
Sure. So the poems are very much about limitations that I feel in this life. I chose a syllabic constraint because I wanted to see if a limited form could speak to me about limitations that are unavoidable in my daily life and those limitations that I don't realize I create, expecting that I can't have something, so I don't go after it. So both those kinds of limitations. And using this form, I wouldn't just be writing about limitation, I'd be living limitation in the form itself to see how I handled it, which was really important to me. Then I would experience limitation as an actual event that I'm in the middle of creating, not the aftermath of an experience I'm describing. So 7 syllables. Okay, so 5 syllables seem too short, too difficult to make a phrase out of. And 9 seem too easy. So 7 seem like the right middle ground. And why odd numbers? Well, David Kane, who's a dear friend and with he and I work on a prosody workshop together, and he's the prosody expert. And he has told all of us in the workshop, and I've heard it many times, that odd-numbered syllabic counts have more spark, more zest, and actually create a sort of a hanging feel. So they're better than even syllabic. So I believe him.
believe him too. I love that. I'm going to think about odd numbers, Rusty. So, in your process note, which you wrote for a series on Ra McLennan's Periodicities blog,
For you,
you state, I often begin a poem with a description of a place where I was or an experience I was in the midst of that keeps coming back into my mind. What happens as I write is that images, the details from the experience, shift and draw in other ideas that my logical mind would never think could be aligned. I find that the images arrive seemingly of their own volition. So I am intrigued by this shifting and realignment, and I would like to hear more how the images arrive on their own volition, and how the pause can be useful in writing, in your writing in general. Just a little bit more about this.
Sure. So, yes, it's often that I start with a recent experience that I've had that has a certain color or flavor, and so I begin to write. And of course, as I've said before, it will fit in the syllabic form. Often what I do next is pause and just let my mind wander serendipitously. And in that wandering, images arrive. And I actually then write in a separate doc file, write out those images and just let them be, because they aren't coming into the poem yet. And it's surprising how they might correspond in, kind of like an acute angle from the poem. But it's just those things that are in my mind, in my subconscious, that wouldn't come forward from my ego just writing forward. Also, some things that come to my mind are lines from people whom I've read or philosophers, and I let myself just sort of write what I remember about them as well. And those are surprisingly apt to what the poem is about. And then I attempt to shift them together, collage the work, listening sonically to what goes together without using my mind per se. And that's how poems arrive that often aren't logically about what they began with, but they are musically and deep thematically more true to what I want, what the poem wants me to say.
I definitely noticed the music in your lines and in your poetry. I'd like to talk a little bit about the poems entitled Narrow Negotiations, which are scattered throughout the book. Each one has exactly 7. There's a 7 again, 7 couplets, 14 lines per poem, and each line has 7 syllables, as does the title. Aside
just lucked out, by the way. I came up with the title for these narrow negotiations that I thought, oh, and I counted it, and it was 7 syllables. So that was the poem's gift to me. Isn't that funny? I didn't work on that.
I love that. So aside from the form, is there something that sets this series apart from the ones that are not titled Narrow Negotiations?
These were much more difficult to write because I knew I had to come out with 7 couplets, 14 lines, 7 syllables each. And I never began with even an idea of what I would write about. I just started to write phrases that sonically kind of aligned together and playful. And I'd start one of these and put it aside and, come back the next day and play some more. And what started to happen is those lines started to gel, that I could actually create syllabic And then those ended up really being the middle of the poems, usually. They were never the beginnings, because as I looked at them, they started to suggest to me arenas of thought. And they all move oddly, some more oddly than others. The one that is chaff and chafe, that really happened. So that was one that actually started there. But, playfully working. And then once I would get a sense of what the poem might become, then I would work more structurally. And I often was surprised. I like a strong end, and the end would sometimes come while I was working in the middle, and I would just put it aside and try to bring it all together. But they were the most difficult to write.
Well, so that's a perfect segue for my next question, which is I'd like to hear more about your process of revision for this collection, because I know that you, I think in one of our conversations, you talked about backing up. And, so my questions are, how did the meanings come to you? How was your hearing process heightened in your awareness of counting the syllables as you were composing these poems?
I think that's a terrific thing to say, Ma, because I'm so listening to the sonics of 7 syllables. It frees my mind to just play in the sound field. And that was a gift to me from all the poems. And I think of Helene Cizou, who's one of my favorite writers, and she says, the border is the homeland. It prohibits and gives passage at the same stroke. I think I've got that pretty close. It's one of those things that I just think about all the time. And I think that my work in Risk was to understand which borders were useful containers that need to prohibit, that need to create a boundary, and which borders I need to pass through. Because with the risk of passing through them, making them permeable, so changing meaning entirely gave me a way to find freedom in the work. So
when you said that just now, Rusty, it was for me so visual and cinematic. To do some moving film poems on some of these.
There you go. We could do a collaboration on that.
So I think we have time for my last question. Forrest Gander wrote as part of his endorsement, the dominant theme of Risk is bonding, the bonding of a couple and the bonding that language might engender. Morrison's poems have always struck me with their seriousness, with their aversion to irony, and with their ecstatic merging of abstraction and particularity. Can you please say a little bit about this bonding, as well as to the work's merging of abstraction and particularity?
Yeah, I love this idea of ecstatic merging, of everything. Forrest is brilliant, and it was so valuable for me to read that, because I could feel, I hadn't thought about bonding in the work, but I absolutely felt true to me when I read it, because it is this connectivity to the world that I have struggled with as a child and through my life, to be porous to the world, to allow that connection, which I'm afraid of and that I need as a soul, to be in connection with other people, and through them, the spirit. And as I get older, it's only more and more important to me to find spirit coming into me and rising out of me, which is what poems do. And so bonding with others is the first order of letting a porosity occur. And it's, of course, with those whom I love. Also, as the poems talk about, like the woman on the BART train, other poems are about people I see in the street, that I may not know someone, but something about their eyes meet mine, and I feel as though I've known them for lives and lives. And that's such a powerful feeling. I attempted to find language to say that without explaining it by the intimacy of the moment. Forrest also caught something that's really important to me in all of my books, specificity and abstraction. And it is through the specifics, the details, that are really the first way I start to write details. The details become metaphors, but I still don't really know what the abstraction is, the greater theme, the greater truth of my life that is being revealed to me through the particulars. And so, because having the abstract truths that I live by arrive through details is what's most significant to me in all my work. So, God has blessed Forrest.
Yes, we love Forrest. Thank you, Rusty. Thank you. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Right, but right now,
I'm going to read some poems, and
read lots.
I would like to thank Zach and Paula and everyone at Book Passage, and thank you, Rusty, for being an inspiration for me. Thank you, Laura. I know you're watching. Thank you to all the wonderful Omnidawn fam and who create these beautiful books year after year. So I would like to share some poems from Percussing the Thinking Jar, which is coming out in the fall. And the first one is entitled Log Thought. Log Thought. Read the vulnerability clause. Faint in the trenches. Find cheap healers online. I see a bluebird with teeth. I can't find my veins. My sister, an intimate contortionist. Interrogate, vault. Catalog. Check work email. Read about flooding in Puerto Rico. Put lotion on dry legs, Spectrovite vitamin bottles on dining room table. Try to remember next PT appointment. Listen to bird songs on YouTube. Makes me think of the bird on yesterday's walk. My friend trying to ID with an app on her phone. The announcement by Taco Bell that their guacamole would not suffer from the impact of Mexico's dearth of avocados. Leg stretches. Where should I donate my clothes? The abbess in Urkuti sending out newsletters on compassion. Soldiers gunned down village in Myanmar. Text a client 2 close-up photos of the scars on my abdomen, which I meant to send to my doctor at Kaiser. A thin trail of blood in one, the other shaped like a star, my navel exposed, my hand holding up my right breast.
Mm.
And this is called Thought Log. Thought Log. Hula mantras, sacred optometry, lanai euphoria. An island trickster disappears with a laptop. Places with the highest daily reported cases per capita. The memoir instructor, guts on the table now. Testosterone descendants, anxiety gratitude, barrier echoes. I conspired with the sun today. Tom-tom, timpani, celesta, the word extinction capital of the world. Our memory concussion. All applause for the creator. Orchid choir, wavescape, grass basket. Fake meat, pork chops, and white rice. The earth's hottest years on record. Found manifesto, desperation ceiling, storage unit. The universal is personified. Only wooden things always. And this is entitled Observation Log. You can probably see a theme. We hear chants. Do their protests sound out a future we'll be able to witness? My family in Yangon no longer leaves home. Hyphen log. Question mark, comma, hyphen. Marks punctuated by division upon division. A leaving behind, a coming toward, a moving between. Language heard over tables under walls. How we connect, how we do not. Flip-flops, tea shop, full stop. Burma, Myanmar. Born within a border is another border. Collision tables, brain sprain, division trains. A comma, soft pause, separates conjunctions. Shot echoes, cyclone pound, plumeria, rain. And this is called the Thinking Jar. A raven in forest mist flaps. I sleep there, land on silent feet. Stricken leaves, loons asunder, white drunk eyes. A hand pockets yellow twig. I coax deep star rebellion, strung with guts, frog mouths, my cavity family. Specter of a father in thorn meadows, baptismal. A raccoon in the closet plays death metal. Upstairs, two people fall against iron wires. I am rose hybrid, wet with the sweat of labor. A biscuit in butterflake motion. The casket. Sunset violet tendrils. I mold a beetle from warmed copper. A lighthouse in Iceland. I loosen my grip on snow. Gray gripe. Trampled arabesque. Censored by the library, a political leopard. A drowning in the river downstate, I slide on the silty bottom. Tawny coyote watching. And this is the time. Sleep log. Just a few more poems. Sleep log. I talk while I sleep. Sometimes I laugh for a long while. T tells me that I speak quickly and he can only hear my side of conversations. I dream about caves, lakes, drapes. I flap my arms with much effort. Fly upwards, hit a smooth white ceiling. My snores are delicate, T says. I hear a disembodied voice. Snap, alert. For years, nails and shards of glass flew from my mouth. I imagine this as rage. I sleep under 4 heavy blankets. Dream about losing a purse, even though I don't own one. My older sister visits me. She died 6 years ago. She swings a leopard skin pouch around on a golden chain. She's glowing. I whisper, everything is going to be okay. And this is my second to last poem, Snake. Pain coiled within skull. Spine serpentine on calfskin sofa. Hydrocodone and THC bath salts from town. Snake ascends from curving spine. Grass gathers along forearms. Foam brace pulls neck up straight. Snake in a patch near the crown. Winding road ahead veers in dark. Musculoskeletal x-rays flash in brain. Rip of ache zips from the hip. Ginger and turmeric roots grow under scalp. Rhizome shoots appear on shoulder blades. And this is my last poem, and it's called The Thinking Jar. An antelope asleep in the wood. I shop for peanut brittle online. Violet strings, a muscle prediction, an airport therapy session, or a clue to find sea urchins in the bow blue. I draw with blood these days, a pile of pink shells. I am a dram of neurotic fixes, a hatchling in the parlor, fingerling in the hot oil, fire ant eyes. I drop a shock of wicked white hair to the floor. A blackbird lands on the thinking jar. Wonder if I can swim from the Isle of Elderberry.
Oh,
Thank you for-
wonderful, wonderful. Ma, it occurs to me, and I've thought about this before, but in this context, how you too, or you also use the Helene Cixous, the border makes up the homeland, it prohibits and gives passage on each stroke. In many poems, you create a frame, and then you play right on the side of the border with those two-word sets, and we go further out and come in, and so it's a wonderful weaving of logic and image, some non-logic, some logic, lots of image. So it's lovely to hear you.
Oh, thank you, Rusty. I think there's some similarities between our work. Well, it looks like there are a couple questions.
So and Paula's back.
And I'm back. I'm back with those questions. Yes, thank you to both of you. I just want to say before we jump into the questions, that not only are your poems beautiful, but I feel that you present as well as you write. And tell me if I'm wrong, but that's probably not the case for every poet, right? It's not always a given that you can be as comfortable presenting as you are writing them, but you two seem to be naturals. You could have just gone on and on and on for me.
Thank you.
You,
Yeah.
Paula.
So Allison asked, and she didn't say who this was for, so I guess either or both of you can take this. When writing poetry, are you writing for yourself, like in the moment, or do you have an audience in mind?
Well, maybe we can both answer that. For me, I'm writing for the poem initially. I'm writing for finding what the poem's trajectory is, and if I can give it its full flower. And that's what's most significant to me. And later, I definitely hope that it will have meaning for those who read it. But I have to think, I'm not writing for me or others. I have to stay true to the trajectory of the work, or I lose the work. The poem says, "You're not listening to me. I'm going away." So I know very clearly when I step away from that work.
Yeah, I would have to say I echo what Rusty said. I, when writing the poem, I'm thinking of the poem and not thinking foremost of the audience. Perhaps that comes in later during revision. I often in revision will read my poems aloud, and I will be, of course, for myself, become, have an awareness of the listener, and how it could, but it's also hard to know too, like there's so many readers and so many listeners. But initially I would say my impulse is for the poem and to the poem.
And as you say, Ma, the first time I read a poem to an audience, it's there's something synergistic that occurs, and I'll feel when a line simply isn't alive for me. Sometimes I'm revising on the spot and I'll say something else because it feels more true, and then I have to quickly get a pen after and write down what that was and find some version. But I think it's also the poem interacting with the audience. I'm just out here kind of trying to be a good guardian of the energy.
That's beautiful. I also revise sometimes when I'm reading aloud, and I did a read through right before we signed on, and I was just like, I need to change that word. That word doesn't work. So I think reading aloud and also doing readings for audiences can be really helpful in the revision process.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you're saying that, because when I think of other forms, as far as like, let's say for playwrights, if a company or a school takes on a play, they really have to stick to the exact wording. There's no playing with it. That's interesting that you have that freedom. And even a good friend of mine who's a recent published author for fiction, when she went in to do the audio version of her book, like, she would notice something, not necessarily wrong, but like in the moment of talking it, she thought, oh, I think it really should be this. But the engineer's like, oh, no, 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 no. You have to no correcting now. So I think it's great that you do, in a sense, have a little bit of that freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jason said, and I think this is for you, Rusty. You mentioned that you let your mind wander, I guess, through the writing process or thinking it through. But to him, that seemed to be in contradiction to putting yourself under such constraints when actually writing it, through these limitations that you have set up for yourself. Can you explain that seeming contradiction and how that works?
What's his name?
Jason.
Jason, you're right. It is a contradiction, and that's what's kind of thrilling for me, because when I'm in this constraint and it's not working, I have to break free of the constraint and write over here in a doc file, away from the poem, the images and the ideas that come to mind, and then I have to bring that back, which is the opposite, to the poem's constraint, and somehow collage that work and see what magnetizes, see what where the two pieces of iron connect and what doesn't work. So it's a game. It's a really interesting game for me. It's my favorite thing to do in the world. And it's challenging. I've actually started a second book in 7-syllable syllabics because I'm just committed right now to what this does for me and to me.
Great. No, that doesn't make sense, and yet it does make sense.
Good.
But it's a great explanation. Miriam asks, how do your limitations compare to, say, Shakespeare's iambic pentameter? Is it just a matter of the 5 syllables versus 7, or is something very much more going on?
I certainly can't speak for Shakespeare, but iambic pentameter adds the beats as well, the sonic beats as well as the syllabics, and that's another form of constraint. So but I think that the iambic pentameter can go on with many pentameters, iambic pentameters, through the line. There aren't quite as many constraints. We also tend to speak in English in iambic pentameter. So it is a fluency that we are innately attuned to, but maybe that's because of Shakespeare. So I think it's different but similar, and difficult in a different ways.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I was wondering, and I'm going to put this to both of you, when you have a form experimentation, is that something you would recommend for like someone first getting into poetry, or do you think they should start with very traditional, very basic, or is it okay to start experimenting right away? Basically, I'm saying, as you know, if you were talking to new poets or people wanting to kind of break into that writing form.
Um, I can go first. Well, I taught prosody not last semester, but the semester before, and we learned a lot of the primary poetic forms. But I also had the class invent their own forms, and I think it really is a wonderful exercise for everyone, all poets, to invent your own form. And sometimes it can just happen organically. So the thought log that I read, like I think it was the second poem, maybe, that poem follows a form, which I call a thought. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to call a thought log form, but it's 16 lines. And I won't go through it. It's a little complicated. So, but there are like about 7 different rules that I'm following for the thought logs. But I didn't realize that I was writing with certain patterns until later when I looked at my notebooks the first 2 years of lockdown. And I realized that I was writing these paired juxtapositions in groups of 3. And I just had notebooks, just with these pairs strewn throughout many, many notebooks. And I just thought that was so interesting. And that later I decided to create a form that kind of stemmed from that. So I went back, and I think I wrote 25 thought logs. I went back to the first 12 and had to revise them to fit the form with all the rules.
Mm-hmm. And those 2-word phrases are just spectacular. They're often a particular and an abstraction, or a particular and a surprising juxtaposition. So an object and an emotion or something. And so it's really interesting pair play. To answer the question, I agree with Ma that if a poet is willing to risk forms, then what he, she, or they gain is not to simply be writing lines from their ego or from what they always say. And, it immediately takes some of that logic away from the structure that you're thinking about syllabics and not what next word is going to be. So it loosens you up, I think. For me, it really loosens me up, which is why I'm staying with this form. And even in other books, like After Urgency, there are like 5 different forms I use. And they keep me, they're not this tight a form, but they keep me outside of what I think I want to say. And The Truth Keeps Come Biting Its story is also in a very tight form. But again, not quite this form. So I think I'm always an organic form writer, but as Ma said, there are always forms that actually arrive from something I was writing and realized that's a form. Okay, I'm going to capitalize on that. So I agree, Ma.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. And it seems like it could be I think one of you touched on it, freeing for someone who's actually just starting out to not limit yourself. But once again, comparing to other forms of writing, it would be like, no, you've got to start off with kind of traditional, especially like, let's say, a mystery writer or something like that. There's a certain formula. And it sounds like you're saying, no, you actually, with poetry, you might actually grow or tap into something more interesting to not limit yourself or to create your own form.
And some fiction is fantastically unusual in its form, so a short paragraph, a one sentence page, a longer paragraph. So there are so many
Yep.
ways to break the frame in fiction writing and memoir. So
Yeah, the Booker winner from a few years ago, Bernadine Evaristo, I think I'm pronouncing her name right. Was it woman, girl, it's like a 5-word title that was great. And our book club read her book, and we had to actually adjust because she didn't have a lot of punctuation by design. But it's amazing how, as a reader, you can adjust. Once you get into the rhythm and you figure out the author or the writer's rhythm, it just becomes very natural. So,
What
yeah.
was her name again? Bernadine?
Bernadine Evaristo. She's British.
Great. And a Booker Prize winner.
Yeah, I believe it was the Booker Prize. It was fascinating. It was just fantastic. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. But you two, thank you so much.
Oh,
This
such a
has been
pleasure.
so interesting to really kind of talk about the different forms and structures and to hear you read your words. Because I mean, I feel like your poetry is meant to be read aloud. So thank you for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Ma, Zach, Paula, and everyone at Book Passage. I know there's so many people who are making this happen. And I'm going to get up to the store soon. It's just a great store. Buy some books. I love it.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I want to also thank our audience, whether you're joining
Thank
us.
you, audience.
Yeah,
Yes.
whether you're joining us live or you're joining us later in the archives, we really appreciate your support for these types of events. And come in person. We have a lot of in-store events. Just go to our website for the latest information. If something's online or if it's in-store in San Francisco or Corte Madera, we're always updating our website. And you know what? Your viewer support is not only through watching and writing comments and questions, but it's also by buying the featured book or books in this case. Please, we do have a link right below where you're watching this that you can just hit and you can order Risk today by Rusty Morrison. And we really encourage you to do that. Not only does it support the writer, but it also supports Book Passage and independent bookstores, which is so important.
So important.
Yeah, and feel free to come in person. We have the book on hand in our San Francisco Ferry Building store, as well as our Corte Madera in Marin County. So we invite you to come in person or just click that link right now. But thank you to the audience and thank you once again, Rusty and Ma, until the next event. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.